Okay.
So first of all, hello and welcome to this Horsefest webinar, this time with Marc-Jerram, who's going to be talking about essential hoof care for our horses. So as most of you know, Horse Tribe obviously is the community part of Horsefest. So we've got free membership, which enables you access to all of the articles and information on the website. And then obviously the add-on of these fabulous webinars with some great experts over the coming weeks and months. So with this week, we're going to be welcoming Marc, but before we do that, Marc, could we just move on to the next slide? And I'm just going to chat through a little bit of tech. So on your screen, you've probably got a picture of that's Liz there, not Liz, but Marc. At the bottom of your screen, you've got a couple of options. It says chat and Q&A. We're not going to be using the chat today, but we are going to be using the Q&A for questions and answers. So please click into there if you've got a question and just type away. Also, you can ask to be unmuted by raising your hand when it comes to the questions. So please feel free to ask questions at a couple of different points when Marc pauses. I think that's it from me. Oh, other than to say the whole webinar is being recorded, and obviously that will be on the website in the next few days after the session. Other than that, I think we're just going to hand over to Marc-Jerram, who's a master farrier with oodles of additional qualifications in addition to the basic farrier qualification. But welcome, Marc. Welcome to this Horse Tribe.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
We'll disappear and hand over to you. See you in a bit.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marc.
Well, good evening and welcome to you all. And I hope you have a nice day on this lovely summer's day. It's been great to be outside with the horses today. A little bit hot in my job, working with hot steel and hot horses and horseflies, but still, it's been a real good time of year. I've been invited to present to you tonight a presentation on good essentials of hoof care and what we can do, the simple basic things we can do to help our horses. And the vast majority of what we can do is easy and basic. So I hope we can get a lot out of this webinar tonight. And if you have any questions at any point, feel free to ask. Now we know how to do this through Zoom. And when it comes to the Horsefest next summer, I'll be there in person, be able to answer any questions you have about your horse's hooves, or if you want to know about certain injuries or lameness issues. And there'll be plenty to discuss there, plenty of practical demonstrations. But whilst we are restricted by the current COVID situation, we offer these webinars out to you all. So hopefully we can still have a fair bit of participation. So a little bit about me, if you haven't met me yet, or you haven't heard my name. I'm a registered farrier working right on the Staffordshire border, next door to Weston Park, where Horsefest is taking place next July 2022. I've been shoeing now for over 20 years, ever since I left school. I hold the Diploma of the Worshipful Company of Farriers qualification and the Associate of the Worshipful Company of Farriers qualification, which is considered the international gold standard of farriery. I've had 3 degrees now, so 3 separate degrees in terms of farrier science. I'm very keen to research and do publishable work. And so far, I've had over 40 hoof care articles published all around the world. And as a consequence, I'd like to spread any sort of education I've had or any information I've learned around. So I think it's best spread around to as many people as possible so we can help as many horses as possible. So I try to provide clinics for farriers, vets, physiotherapists and horse owners, because I think we're all key to the soundness of the horse and the performance of the horse. And as a consequence, I'm now an equine veterinary student toward host farrier, so I help to train the veterinary surgeons of the future about hoof care and how to assess hoof balance, and how to remove shoes, and how we can treat certain pathologies. So that's enough about me now, and let's start to discuss something a little bit more interesting. So first and foremost, why is the care of our horses' hooves important? Well, simply, it keeps horses healthy. If we can keep the feet healthy, we can prevent lamenesses, we can prevent any infections occurring, or at least minimise the chance of these occurring as well. And also helps prevent any vet bills or any potential treatments that may come as a consequence of poor hoof care. Some of these things are quite avoidable if you see suitable checks are made. And if you've got a horse you want to get a bit extra out of, it helps to maximise your horse's performance. You know, if you're going to be off doing eventing or show jumping or even just hacking out, the simple basic care of feet can help to get the most out of your horse and keep them enjoyable. So first and foremost, what should be your daily routine every time you come to your horse? A lot of us see our horses twice a day, sometimes more, usually in the morning and in the evening. This time of year, most horses are living out. There are some yards where obviously that's restricted and they are in at night time, out in the daytime, or vice versa. And it may be the same all year round routine. Personally, my own horses are out this time of year, living out. They enjoy being out and as much movement as possible. But what should your daily hoof care routine be? Well, first and foremost, pick the feet out, and because you never know what you may find underneath there. This is a horse not that I shoe, but a client of mine works at a riding school, and I get a panicked message over a weekend saying one of the school horses, they've got a nail in the foot, and this is sometimes, this is something that can be found. She actually saw this horse walk onto this, so it didn't actually go in that deep. And there was no need for veterinary treatment, but if you can imagine that foot wasn't picked out and that screw would push further into the foot, or that piece of wood that it's attached to would have broken up and gone further into the foot, that could have been quite lethal. It could have been quite, life limiting if it hit the wrong part of the hoof internally. So picking the feet out every visit is a gold standard. So if you're going to turn out in the morning, picking out all the muck from the stable, and then when they come in from the field at night, pick the feet out again, and it gives you a chance just to assess everything and make sure everything's all healthy. Likewise, back in the winter times when we had snow, which seems like an awfully long time ago now, and in contrast to the weather we're having now, you'll see snow ball up in feet, and this can create bruising and uncomfortableness. So this obviously is severely balled up in the foot. This is actually one of my own horses. So pick the feet out where you can. You can sometimes put lard or Vaseline inside there to stop snowballing in, but that's just an example really of how we can make things a little bit easier by picking feet out. And by picking feet out, you can ensure that the shoes are attached correctly. So here's an example of a horse that's coming from the field, and to be fair, this got caught quite quickly as well. This horse put a foot down a drain that had broken and moved the shoe across, and the side clip of the back foot is standing on the hoof wall. The nails are missing, fortunately. The good thing about horseshoe nails is the vast majority, if horses stand on them, they tend to bend. They don't tend to penetrate in like a fencing nail or a screw. They're actually quite weak, and they actually bend quite easily. That's not to say they won't punch your feet, but they tend to be okay. But when a horse is standing on a clip like that, it's incredibly uncomfortable, and would be quite similar to having a stone in our boot rattling round, and we've all had stones in our boots and felt uncomfortable. So it'd be a similar sort of feeling for the horse. You always feel the worst when you see this because the horse is a three-legged lame. But I went to this horse within an hour of this happening, and took the shoe off, cleaned it up, nailed it back on, and the horse walked away sound and was sound ever since. So, but by checking that, if that's been all overnight, not weight bearing on that foot, and bearing weight on the opposite limb, that would create potential issues as well. So it's a simple procedure really of picking feet out every time you visit your horse will help to prevent these things happening, and it helps to check also for any interference injuries. So here's a horse here that's coming from a field of an overreach. They tend to be on the outside heel of the front feet because of the direction that hind feet travel. Both hind feet, if you look at your horse, are slightly turned out. That's the natural position and conformation of the horse. That's how they're put together. But yeah, an overreach there. But again, that's a fairly recent one. We can see the splatters of blood underneath there, and that's easily treated there now just by cleaning it off, drying it off, and then putting some pseudocreme on there to stop any flies landing in there and any potential infection that can happen. Of course, by wearing overreach boots, that helps to reduce the chances of an overreach occurring. I certainly think if this horse had an overreach boot on in turnout, that would not have created it's only a slight laceration, but it's a laceration nonetheless. So by having overreach boots on there would help to prevent that. But that's something to keep an eye out as well. So check the shoes are tight, make sure the feet are picked out, make sure there's nothing there that shouldn't be there, and so a quick run round, a quick look round the heel bolts of your horse and make sure there's nothing that's been caught in there or any potential wire injury there. So always check that over. And now the other thing to consider is how often should you have your horses trimmed or shod? It depends really on their workload for one, but also their hoof conformation and the position of their feet. So the foot on the left is quite a low heeled foot. There's a mismatch in heel and toe angles. Heels are quite underrun, and you probably want to have these done about every 4 weeks, maximum 5 weeks. It does seem quite frequent, but the more these get out of balance, the more of a strain gets placed in the back of the leg, just because the toe will run forwards, and as a consequence, the fetlock will drop, putting strain on the ligaments and tendons that pass over that area. The hoof on the right is the barefoot hoof, and these can perhaps go a touch longer in between. This back can probably go about 6 weeks, I'd say. But again, the same consequences occur as feet grow. The toe angle reduces, the toe length increases, and the more strain gets placed at the back of the foot. When we deal with injuries to the hoof and to the limb, it's nearly always suspensory ligament or flexor tendon issues. It's extremely rare where you get the tendons that pass at the front of the leg, which are called extensor tendons, that they get injured. It's extremely rare. So that's something to consider really, that if you look at the back of the leg and the strainer gets pulled under by a long toe, then having a shortened cycle is better. And also another thing to consider is this time of year, feet are growing really fast. Feet are growing really fast. There's plenty of grass in at the moment for horses to eat. The blood circulation is going to helping them grow rather than keeping them warm, which happens in the winter. And that's why you see the two factors. That's why hoof growth slows down in the winter, is because the blood supply goes to keeping them warm, and the nutritional aspect is reduced because there's less lush grass around, less non-structural carbohydrates in the grass. So there are a couple of things to consider there. And the old debate of should you have your horse barefoot or shod? And for me, it just depends on what you're asking the horse to do. For me, it doesn't really matter if you're barefoot or shod, as long as the horse is functional and fit for purpose. There is no one size fits all in horses, in any aspect of horses. So it's that should be also applied to feet. Now, the example on the left is a wild Exmoor pony I do at a nature reserve, and these feet can go 10 weeks quite easily. Good strong feet, they don't need shoes, and that should be quite a detriment to shoe that foot, and there's absolutely no need to shoe that foot whatsoever. And because they're living out in the wild, you'll offer no benefit really, no protection. We've got good strong feet, good well-developed back of the foot. The example on the right is a hunt horse that's wearing quite a thick shoe, and that shoe will be worn out in 4 weeks. So I have to hand make the shoe for that horse, because standard machine-made shoes get worn out in 2.5 to 3 weeks. So the thickness of that particular foot in that shoe, that horse could not go barefoot. It would certainly go sore, and there would be no transitional period that would suffice to that due to the work that's been asked of the horse. So as long as a horse is fit for purpose and for intended use, barefoot or shod is fine. Just always consult with your hoof care provider about what the best options are. And I'd strongly recommend using a registered farrier for your horses. It goes without saying, if you're going to have shoes on your horse, they have to legally be required by law to be registered. The way to find out if your farrier is registered is to go on the official website of the Farrier Registration Council. There's a real handy find a farrier search engine, and it helps you to check the credentials of your farrier and make sure they are registered. I would say nearly everybody watching this will have a registered farrier. The only time it may not is if you use a barefoot trimmer, but there are advantages to using a registered farrier as opposed to a trimmer. We are examined to the highest standards in the world. We go for the most robust and most, cautiously tested exam procedures. And yeah, it takes real something to pass the Worshipful Company Farriers exams. We are fully insured as a consequence by being registered. We had to apply and record CPD every year, continual professional development, to ensure we're looking after your horses as best as we can. We're learning new techniques, we're keeping up to date with progress, and we're doing the very best we can to offer the best services. And also we had to pass a criminal record check, so peace of mind really if you have children or a loved one who you send out to the farriers who comes out to your property, you can be rest assured that there's no skeletons in the closet. So a little bit on why I say we should use a registered farrier. So that's been my personal advice. And a little bit of advice on how to present your horse to farrier. We've got it easy this time of year. It's really warm, it's really dry, and there's no mud around, and a lot of horses are coming in from the field like this, nice and clean and dry. And we have to be realistic in the winter. Not everywhere has mud, everywhere's wet, but if we could keep them in for a couple of hours, as long as the horse is happy to, we can just as a dry horse at this time. And the reason for this being is not because farriers like to be grumpy and moan about mud, but also we can see a lot more when a horse is clean and dry. This horse has 3 white socks, and if that's covered up to the fetlocks in mud, we may miss a distorted hairline, we may miss a hoof imbalance because it's all covered up in mud, and also it doesn't allow us to do as good a job as what we'd like to do. It'd be great if we could all have concrete to stand on and everything else. I realise it's not always possible, but where we can offer the best possible service. So a little bit on there, the work area. So this is my own horse. I'll just use an example really. This is, I love shooting at my own place because I've got a barn undercover, flat concrete, somewhere safe to tie up, free of obstacles, and that'd be a safe environment for your farrier to work in. And no horses over the stable doors squealing noses or having fights over hay nets. So that'd be my advice there, to provide a good working area for your farrier and allow them to do the best job they can. Also, at the time of the appointment, do discuss with your farrier any sort of concerns you have or any issues you have prior to shoeing taking place, because the more information we can take in, the more we can do to help your horse. And perhaps even just the slightest alteration to the trim or to the shoe, and it can make a massive difference to your horse's performance. If you can get videos of your horse competing or any flat work you're doing at home, that's very useful as well, because we can use that and see things perhaps, the more sets of eyes on your horse, the better. So when we come to assess the horse before shoeing, I like to take a walk up first. So we look at this horse here, walking away. You see on the left hind, just landing slightly lateral first there. This is a horse at a rehab yard. Walk up on a nice flat bit of concrete, walking away and walking back. I think this is just going to be a walk assessment on this video. We can see any hoof landings. We can video these with our phone. We might just see on this one just a slightly lateral first landing on this horse. It's easy to see when the hoof is slowed down, but you can just see it lands outside first and inside. This one's had a collateral ligament injury, so it's basically an equine equivalent of a twisted ankle. And by doing that sort of assessment, we can formulate a shoeing plan then going forwards. So if possible, please present your horse with a walk up or even a trot up. I think as farriers we can see a lot more in walk, particularly when we slow down with our camera phones. Trots just helps to make sure the horse is sound, but it's quite difficult for the human eye to really ascertain hoof landing just by eye, so a camera will help out with that as well. So I'd like to move on to some basic common problems that we come across, and the first one I'd like to talk about is thrush. And thrush is a bacterial infection of the frog caused by a bacteria called Fusobacterium necrophorium, which you don't really have to remember that, but basically it's found in waste. And what you'll see when you say waste, I mean like horse poo or dirty stables or muddy fields. And what you'll see as a symptom is black discharge in the central sulcus of the frog, which is the centre of the frog, and down either sides of the frog. And sometimes that the central sulcus will split of the frog, and the heels will be able to move independently. It's a very unpleasant odour. I think we've all been able to smell this before. In horses, it's quite a distinct smell when we pick the feet out. This can happen in both shod and unshod horses, so there's no advantage either way to prevention by being shod or unshod. It depends on how vaulted the frogs are. And a vaulted frog is one that's drawn up into the foot a bit more, so they're more likely to be infected due to the amount of ground clearance and the amount of ability to pack muck in there. And if this is left untreated, the frog can become quite sensitive. The split in the centre of the frog can allow dirt, grit and sand get together up there and get quite close to some very important sensitive structures, and as a result can lead to quite severe lameness. So what causes thrush to happen? And it has to be considered that the horse is always housed in an area of higher bacteria, so such as the stables. Rubber matting is a big thing now. We have more rubber matting than ever because it helps to save on bedding. However, what we save on bedding by using rubber matting, they're standing in a lot of around wheel a lot of the time, so you're getting wet, disgusting smelling frogs. And unfortunately, poor soil quality is a problem as well, and we'll move on to that a little bit in a minute. I'll talk a bit more about that more in depth. But dirty bedding as well, deep shavings bed, deep littering bedding will keep it high of bacteria and dirty and lead to thrush developing. The conformation of the hoof as well, as we discussed earlier, a high vaulted frog inside the foot, quite an upright foot, will lead to muck being trapped in there. And unfortunately, sometimes we have to box rest our horses, and if they're to stay in, there's more chance of them just standing in their own mess. So that's something else to consider. If your horse has to be on box rest, cleaning out feet regular is going to be vital, and treating them with an antifungal solution as well. Again, we'll come on to the best solutions for that as we go along as well. So feet not being picked out, it all leads to it really. I think if feet are frequently picked out and the right treatments are applied, it can easily be prevented. So going back up onto the soil types, poor soil types I was describing in the last one. I conducted a study a couple of years ago because for me, I found that there are some owners that never picked feet out. In fact, I was the only one who went there and picked feet out when the horse was shod or trimmed, and they had no thrush issues whatsoever. And then you had some owners that were doing every day religiously and doing everything asked of them treatment wise, and the horses continually got thrush. And I thought there has to be a reason why this happened. So I got 25 horses infected with thrush and 25 without. I went into turnout paddocks where they're normally kept and just used a simple pH probe, dropped it into soil and measured each one, and every single one that wasn't infected with thrush was on under pH 7, so acid soil, and all the ones with thrush infection had a pH of 7 or more. So it's quite a constant link there between the two. It's not the only factor as to why thrush develops, but it's quite an interesting one, and one that probably deserves a bit more investigation really in terms of environmental conditions that affect hoof quality. That is something another area that's worth researching more so, and perhaps something I might look forward into as time progresses. So still an interesting side effect there of thrush infection. So these are my recommended treatments for thrush that I recommend to my clients that have these. There's the NT dry powder, which is a good drying powder that you can apply and dust onto the frog when the horse is stabled. That tends to be best when the horse is brought in, feet picked out and that applied. If you've got a split in the central sulcus, in the centre of the frog, there's a product called Hoof Stuff by Red Horse Products, and it's almost like a cotton wool and pseudocreme combination, if you were to describe it as something. There's a lot more to that. It's it's definitely a material that you can roll together, pick out and roll together into a sausage and just force into that central crack there, work it in all the way in, let it become part of the body of the frog. And what that does then, it kills any bacteria that's present within inside, but also becomes part of the body of the frog and allows it to regenerate that central sulcus. And to top it off, I use a lot of this stuff as well. This is called Artimud, and it's basically an antifungal clay. So if you haven't got a split in the central sulcus and your horse, for example, is on box rest, picking out daily and applying some antifungal clay will leave you with a very nice, clean, healthy frog. You can apply it to the sole as well, full of natural ingredients. There's nothing harmful or chemical in there. And I use this a lot under hoof pads because you haven't got access to pick out, and by putting this under hoof pads with some impression materials and nothing else can get underneath there, it leads to a really clean, healthy frog underneath when we come back to them. So sometimes we can't get access to pick out, and this is another alternative method. So if you have to also have corrective shoes on with a frog plate, well, that can be problematic because the frog plate that's on there will not allow you to get a hoof pick underneath there. So this is an example of a horse that had sheared heels and thrush, so I wanted to use a bar there to stop the heels moving. Underneath this is a packing called Solution for Feet Matrix. And this is basically shreds of leather soaked in anti-bac solution. So that's underneath there, working away, keeping everything clean, and the shoes doing the biomechanical job, keeping everything nice and secure and in place. You'll see this shoe, this is from a while back now, and this shoe has got copper nails driven into the foot. I went through a phase of using copper nails as it is suggested that antimicrobial properties. I've gone away a bit from this now because I don't feel they were particularly effective. And to be fair, I didn't really have much of an issue with white line health with the nailing styles as I did. But also the side effect of the copper nails, and it's just my own personal opinion, is that copper as a mineral is also classed as a lubricant. So I found I lost a lot more shoes by using copper nails. Now I've gone back to steel nails and not really noticed any difference in hoof quality, but more secure shoes. So that's just a personal preference. And sometimes in life we have to try these things out to help the horses we work with. And there's sometimes we have great successes, and there's sometimes where we try something and we go back to something else instead. And this is an example of that happening with the copper nails. So this is the frog that's had, this might not be a particularly clear image, but this is a frog that's had Artimud underneath a pad, and that's as healthy or even healthier than if it was left open. There's no split in the central sulcus, there's no black discharge, it's so clean you can eat your dinner off that. So it just shows you the results of what we do and what we apply can be beneficial. And does anybody have any questions so far whilst at this juncture, please?
Mark, I've just noticed a question that came in a little while ago before you talked about the frog. I'm just going to find it because I think it's really relevant. It's about, right, okay, yeah. What's your view on pads for a horse who's sensitive on stony ground? I heard they can potentially stop the frog from working properly. Is that right? So I guess that kind of links into the use of pads that you're just talking about.
Yes, absolutely. And in some slides to come, you'll see some examples of pads. For me, there's so many different styles of pads now that you can easily create the function of a frog by using a pad. And the reason we can do that is historically we used to have a flat pad of a flat piece of material. It had no traction, and you just basically what went underneath the pad just rotted the frog and it lost function. So the person who asked the question is quite right about that. It didn't used to historically limit the function of a frog. However, now by modern materials that we have now, they help to enhance the frog and actually get the back of the foot working so much better by having that frog piece in there. And there's a couple of different materials we can use now, and you'll see some in a minute. There's some leather, some are synthetic, and some are part leather and part synthetic. For me personally, I've come to realise the leather material acts really well as a dampening mechanism for horses that have joint issues. But synthetic pads are quite good for getting the digital cushion working at the back of the foot as well. So definitely now, I'd say in the last 3-4 years have come on leaps and bounds, and we can have some really good functioning feet.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you very much. Another one that links into something you mentioned before. So you talked about using overreach boots in the field. So my horse continually loses shoes, even with overreach boots. Even with over, I think what they're saying, sorry, it's slightly mistyped, I think. A horse continually loses shoes. They use overreach boots, but should they use them in the winter because it's so muddy? So worried about using the overreach boots in the winter in case they rub.
Yeah, a couple of things to come back to on that one. Yeah, the rubbing effect of overreach boots is a problem. By applying a layer of Vaseline around the rim will help to reduce any sort of rubbing effects of the boots on the feet. Certainly they're going to become more useful in the winter than in the summer because the ground's a lot more deep, and as the front foot gets stuck in the mud, there's also a chance that the back foot can come across and collide with the shoe or the heel. A couple of other things to consider as well is obviously the fit of the overreach boot. So the overreach boot should cover the branches of the shoe when the horse is stood on the ground, which that may be the case with that particular person's horse already. But also, I mean, consider how much that boot rides up when the horse is going through a canter or a trot. So if you can just pick your horse's foot up and see how much that boot comes up and down, if that horse has the potential to basically lift itself up off the hoof and high up past them, then a good tip that I've found is to get a sausage boot on both front legs and put a sausage boot above the overreach boot so it can't ride up. You can't ride up when you're trotting or cantering, and you still have that protection at the back of the shoe then. And hopefully that could be a helpful tip to overcome a potential issue. So yeah, potentially look at either putting some Vaseline around the rim and also combining with a sausage boot, give that a go and see how you go from there.
Brilliant, great advice, thank you. There's another one that links into what we were talking about earlier. So if my horse's shoe is slightly off and it's going to be a day before the farrier can come, should I try and take the shoe off myself? This is the one I've always wondered about as well.
Slightly off, it's a tricky one really, because the example we saw earlier on, that had to come off really, because that horse was sore, non-weight bearing and standing on the clip. If your horse is sounding comfortable, then if the farrier's going to come within 24 hours or a day or so, or a day or two, just keep them on box rest and tape, and get duct tape and tape around the perimeter of the shoe and the foot. But I think as a safe bet, and I do this for all my clients, if there's anything like that, just send me a photo via WhatsApp or via Messenger, and we know exactly what we're dealing with then, and we can advise then correctly. It's tricky sometimes for clients to describe the level of severity over the phone. So I always think a picture paints 1,000 words, but if the heels of the shoes are slightly lifted off, on box rest, taped up, be fine. But if three-legged lame, standing on clips, potentially standing on nails, it's a different story.
Brilliant, great stuff, thank you. I'm going to ask one for me. Should we learn how to take a shoe off just in case, or are we better off just phoning our farrier as an emergency?
For me personally, I feel every yard should ideally have a shoe removal kit as part of the first aid kit. But it's a very hard thing to do. It's a very hard thing to get a shoe off. And you may have to have a designated person to do that. But then again, that designated person may not always be around. It's always good practice to learn how to take shoes off in an emergency. And if your horse is quiet enough and your farrier's got the time to be able to teach you that'd be great as well. So yeah, I think the more we know about feet, and if we are able to take shoes off safely, so you don't get hurt and the horse doesn't get hurt, it's going to be very, very beneficial. So yeah, in the short answer, yes, I think we should all be able to take shoes off, but it's not quite as easy as just saying, just do that.
Yeah, just pull that one off. Okay,
yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. One more question before I'll let you continue, because I know you've got lots more to come later on, and we can ask some of these questions later as well. So I'll just ask one because it does link into food, and you were talking about, you know, beyond grass, etc. So what should a good exterior hoof wall look like? I can see different bands as my horse changes what it eats.
Yeah, you get almost like trauma lines that come in the hoof, basically from the different pastures as well. Hoof rings and growth rings are quite an interesting thing, really, because quite often they're mistaken by the client for laminitic rings. And some people think, you know, oh, my horse got bad laminitis, you know, do you think this horse got laminitis because of the rings on the feet? Well, I'm afraid you would have seen severe lameness before any rings would have developed. That's usually after the event, and they're quite different in the way they present themselves. The laminitic rings, they tend to diverge up towards the heel of the foot, and also tend to dip around in the toe area if there've been laminitic changes. If there's been a change of pasture, you will see a constant ring around the foot that's at the same level, the same line with the ground line. And you may also see repetitive lines that are parallel to the ground, and they're the more concussive base from hard ground or excessive road work. So that's something else to consider there. And a good exterior of the hoof wall would basically have a strong hoof structure with no abnormalities. You'd have, you'd see a strong bond with the hoof and the laminae. You wouldn't see any sort of furriness and brokenness around the base there. You won't see any chipping or splitting, and hopefully no vertical cracks as well. So a good looking hoof is one that's got the least blemishes possible, would be the short answer really for that.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark. There's a few more, but let's carry on, and then we can come back to the extra questions when we get to the end. Just want to make sure you've got enough time to cover everything you wanted to talk about. Thank you.
Yes, no problem at all. So on to abscesses now. I hope you've all eaten your dinner, because here's a nice bit of pus coming from a foot. This is an abscess I popped on the horse, and I think at some point in horse ownership you're going to have to deal with an abscess. These can present quite three-legged lame for horses, non-weight bearing lame. There'll be an increased pulse around the fetlock, a lot of heat in the foot. And in the first instance, really, a lot of the time you get the farrier out, but a vet call is always worthwhile as well. This is the same foot, and a thermal image camera placed across there. We can see it's white hot where we popped that abscess on this foot. So that's the area of pus buildup. And this is how a horse will present with an abscess. Sadly, this is obviously, we know which foot this horse is lame on, the completely non-weight bearing. Using the free legs to get around, very unhappy. And the way we would treat an abscess would first off be bottress. You don't want to be moving around with that sore. It's not very fair on the horse. Immediately seek assistance from your farrier or vet. If your horse is moving like a horse in the video, probably get a quick one on the way into the box and send that across as well, just to give a heads up of what's going on. Ensure that all the injections of your horse are up to date, especially tetanus. You don't want to create any severe infection as a result of the abscess as well. We're going to lead into anything else for the rest of the body. And to treat these, I'd advise salt water soaking once a day, followed by a poultice. So we put that in there, warm salt water, to help draw out any debris, any dirt, any bacteria. Then once that's been drawn out initially with the first salt water soak, get a hot wet poultice on once a day for 4 days. So basically animal intex, a vet wrap and duct tape. There are various videos out there on YouTube showing you how to apply these, but this is a procedure that I think is probably the best way. To do 4 days of hot wet poulticing once a day, see how much pus gets drawn out. You'll probably get a bit of a I wouldn't say the right word, probably perhaps a misjudgment of how much pus will be in the first 3 days, because you'll also draw out bacteria from the frog as well. So you might think you're having an avalanche of stuff come out, when in fact it might just be natural bacteria as well. So over time, as the week progresses, you should have a cleaner poultice each day. And then as a consequence, you can dry poultice just to make sure we get the last little bit of dirt and debris out there, because we don't want to over soften the foot by wet poulticing for too long. And then after that week is up, reassess, see if there's any pus is still losing from the hole, and then implement a further plan, whether it needs to be opened up any further, or whether any sort of protection go on there, such as a shoe or such as a boot to get the horse to be moving out again, or whether we can treat with iodine or any antibacterial solution as a consequence then going forwards. Because of course we're going to have a cavity there now after the abscess has taken place, and it's just a matter of now what we can do to prevent reinfection. A sole bruise is more of a repetitive strain injury, I feel. It can sometimes be a standalone incident. This is the horse here, fairly recent one. You can just see around the toe area around there, a little bit of pink impingement around there. And often, quite a lot of the time, with the consequence of this happening, there's been quite a thin sole that's been present in the hoof, has led to this repetitive strain occurring over hard ground, over stony ground. And the lameness, it can be quite mild or it can be extremely severe. I've seen horses three-legged lame with a stone bruise, and quite often you can see them just a bit off. But again, there are various treatments that can be done for this. To begin with, you perhaps just want to bring them in a box rest and just a couple of days poulticing just to make sure nothing else is brewing. But by over time, there can be a red tinge to the sole from the area of trauma. So by the time you see it at this stage in the hoof, the incident is long gone and is out of the way. Now that is not a sensitive area to touch, really. So, okay, it won't be completely pain-free, but it won't be as if it what happened at the initial phase. So that's something to consider as well when you see a bruise on the sole. So box rest where you can, where your situation allows. Some anti-inflammatory pain relief, such as bute or Danilon, might be prescribed by your vet. Applying iodine to the sole daily is a good solution. For me, it draws out moisture and hardens the sole up. It's a real easy available solution. If you over soften the soles though with poulticing or dressings, you're going to really be fighting a losing battle by making the sole thinner and weaker. And here are a few options as we were discussing earlier for the Q&A about pads. So we've got a flat leather pad there in combination with a corrective shoe, a spider shoe. You've got a synthetic pad there with a frog support. So that frog is functioning there. We've got some impression material underneath, which is a two-part putty shaped to the mould of the sole and frog. There's a layer of artimud on there first though, so we can kill any bacteria that's around the frog and around the sole. And that frog plate there gives the hoof traction and grip, but also facilitates blood flow around the hoof. And the example on the right, again, we've got the frog piece in there for grip and for function of the foot. That side of the pad is plastic, the underneath is leather, so you've got the best of both worlds. I really like those pads on the right. You do use quite a lot of those now, and horses really like them. So that's something to bear in mind as well. If you have sore soles, there's a few options here. And they work, put simply, they work, and they allow horses to go over all terrains. But also, for me personally, they function so much better than an open heel shoe, because with some feet, not all of them, they collapse through a hole in the middle of a normal shoe, particularly if you've got low, weak heels. We need to suspend the horse's body weight above that steel arch, and we can then also provide dampening qualities with a leather pad, like part leather, part synthetic. So we reduce more concussion than if a horse was barefoot. The horse can function like a barefoot with a slight type of protection on. And we have healthier feet as a consequence. Gravel tracks is something that's going to be quite a lot of around at the moment with the dry weather and the hard ground, and the amount of tracks we have now on delivery yards, which are hardcore or road planing based. They can create cavities up the hoof wall there, eat away at the white line, and can create abscessing. So loose chippings on an overstretched white line can work the way up there, and then can then potentially lead to an abscess. This isn't seen in shod horses, I can quite confidently say, because that area of the foot is protected by a steel shoe. But this can still be treated barefoot by using boots. But if we see the example of this horse on the next one, we had a radiograph done of this horse to make sure nothing else was going on. You can see on the right-hand side of that radiograph, that little white clouding, that's a gravel track going up the white line. So to easily overcome this, I packed the area with something called Keratex hoof putty, which is like a wax solution that packs in the white line, kills any remaining bacteria, stops anything else getting in there. A shoe on top of there now, and that cavity has grown out, and the horse is perfectly fine now and healthy, with no abnormalities in the hoof and no more abscesses, thank goodness. Dry feet, that's something that's going to be happening this time of year a lot of. When the hoof dries out and hardens up, it's a low fracture point. So we see this here. This is, again, you know, we want to describe what's a good looking foot exteriorly. This is not a good looking foot. We've got flares of the feet. We've got cracks working their way up there. They're only superficial cracks, but still quite unsightly. There's all chipping around the base there. My advice would be to this time of year would not be to wet the feet at all, or keep them in water, because it dries out rapidly and creates more cracking. So what I would advise to put on these type of feet this time of year is like a hoof moisturizer or something that can maintain hoof flexibility. Avoid traditional hoof oils such as neat foot hoof oil or anything like that. That's dark and black and absorbs the sun. It tends to fry the feet. A good hoof dressing, in my opinion, the gold standard is Kevin Bacon's hoof dressing, because it's more like a cream and more like a balm rather than an oil. It allows the hoof to maintain some flexibility and also keep them so that they don't chip up. So that would be my advice there. When it comes to soft feet in the winter, this is also another problem as well. I think personally, if we can bring them in and towel dry them, I see a lot of people bringing in and hosing feet down, and then they go into a shavings bed, they dry out rapidly and they become quite weak. So bringing them in, picking the feet out, getting an old towel from home, rubbing the towel round and then popping them to bed will stop the feet getting overly soft then. Hoof hardeners, I'm not sure of their efficiency really in terms of hardening, but I think if you're going to apply any sort of hoof hardener that you can buy off the shelf, would be to bring in, pick feet out, dry them off and then apply. So when they're in the stable, I feel if you were to paint them on the feet and then take and turn them out in a wet field, I think they'll be gone within a couple of minutes. The effectiveness will be gone and lost. So that's something to consider there as well. For soft feet when the winter comes round. Hoof cracks, there are various ones and various styles of hoof crack, but here we have one of a toe sand crack which goes all the way from the toe down to the bottom here, and this is one I treated with a frog support pad and a cast. I went round there because that stopped the hoof flexing, and that's a foot on the right at the end of the treatment, just with normal shoes on. Hoof cracks, they are probably best treated with iodine if you've got a crack there that needs treatment, or perhaps something like Bacter-Kill 55, which you can get from farm supply stores. Just got to be careful of that when we apply it. We need to wear gloves because that's carcinogenic, but it works quite well there. A frequent farrier visit will help to oversee the recovery of these type of cracks. Of course, leaving them too long, you're going to have issues here. So probably every 4 or 5 weeks, get the farrier out to come and address these. From yourself as well, applying something like Kevin Bacon's kit, the hoof maintain some flexibility will help these ones as well. And there's a list of a few pathologies there. So is anybody any further questions to round up this essential hoof care webinar? Brilliant,
thank you, Mark. Right, I'm just going to have a little look. So some questions that link back to the things you talked about. So very specific one, would you call the farrier before the vet generally if you suspect an abscess? What are your thoughts? You said either or, I think.
Yeah, that's a tricky one really. How to answer this like a politician, sit on the fence. I think sometimes there'll be some vets that would struggle to get some shoes off. I do have vet students with me and I teach them how to get shoes off, but there's plenty that have not had that experience. I think if a horse is barefoot, I think either or would be fine. But I think if you've got a shod foot, I'd advise calling for the farrier, because they can get the shoe off efficiently without pulling the horse around. And then, of course, the vet can then also be contacted as well, as a backup, just in case any anti-inflammatory medication is required, or any other treatments required as well. So that's with the backup one, really. But for barefoot, either or, shod, go for farrier first.
Perfect. That's really helpful. Thank you. Another one linking back to one of your recommendations. So you talked about iodine to harden the sole. So the question is, would you recommend applying iodine to harden the sole anyway, even without a bruise present?
Yeah, I would. I think they work quite well, really. I've dealt with quite a few laminiticks over the last few years, and we have some that unfortunately get seromas, which is basically when the pedal bone pitches into the sole and creates a big blood blister. So when we pop the blood blister, and it's quite a messy procedure, I won't go too much into details, but once we pop the blood blister, then effectively there's a big cavity in the sole, and we treat that with iodine swabs. And within 6 weeks, that gets really rock hard. The knife is bouncing off it. So I think it's going to be no harm at all by trying that out actually on your horses, to be honest, as a good hardening preventative, effectively.
Yeah. So for a horse with a thin sole, that would help.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a thin sole. Do a daily coating of that.
Brilliant.
Obviously, horses follow their own pathway a lot of the time. There's no cast iron guarantee it'll work, but you're not going to harm anything by trying this as well. It's a non-invasive, non-aggressive treatment. And you also might kill off some bacteria that may be present as well as an added bonus.
Brilliant, thank you. Another question. So linking in this time to putting a balm on the hoof. So I read that it's good to put the hoof balm on the sole as well. Is that useful or just wasting money?
I feel that the majority where we need it is on the hoof wall. You're certainly not going to have any problems at all by putting it on the sole and the frog. I had enough of a battle getting people to put it on the hoof wall. If I asked them to do it on the sole as well, it probably wouldn't get done. But if they can do, it would be great, because again, it allows the sole to maintain some flexibility and the frog as well. That's a gold standard if possible. But if people are going to do the minimum, just do the hoof wall.
Brilliant. Thank you. What was the shredded leather product called again, please? That
was called Solution for Feet Matrix, and that's by the people who make Farriers formula, the feed. You should be able to get through their website, Life Data Labs, I think they're called. Okay,
brilliant. And that links very neatly to the next question, which is to encourage good hoof growth, what supplements would you recommend, as there are a lot on the market?
There are a lot on the market. A lot of them have big claims which they don't really back up. The only sort of supplementation that's been clinically proven to work is biotin, but it's actually been clinically proven with double-blind trials to be effective in hoof growth. But there's so much to this in terms of hoof growth, in terms of hoof quality. We need to then start looking at things like grass analysis, soil analysis, and hay analysis, because a lot of these supplementations, they have a generic amount of, say, magnesium, sodium, zinc, and they have one dosage, and they put it out to every horse that's going to take it. But in fact, we've all got different levels and different requirements. So if we want to really go for a really good, well-balanced supplementation, it's an expensive way of doing things, and it's a complicated way of doing things. If we can get our soil analysed and our grass analysed, and we can then see what the minerals are lacking and supplement it appropriately, rather than over supplementing one and under supplementing another area. The hay analysis works quite well. However, the issue being, when you get hay from a farm, it could come from various fields, so you'd have to test every batch, and it's probably not so helpful. But certainly a good baseline would be grass and soil analysis to then progress forward with a nutritional plan for hoof growth.
And if you're just going to go for one thing, then the answer is go for biotin.
Absolutely.
And does it matter which brand?
No, biotin is a standalone supplement, and just supplement biotin in. I think various companies sell it as a standalone, and I think it's quite cost effective.
Perfect, thank you. Couple of extras. So one of my horse's feet that go really long. So one of my horses has feet that go really long and splayed after 6 weeks. We switched to 5 weeks and quarter clips to bring them together. Is there anything else we could do or think about?
For me, again, it sounds like I'm trying to spend all of your money tonight with my plans, but there's a massive advantage to having your horses radiographed every year, if possible. If there is an issue like this, because I think a lot of the time we're better off now, especially the price of horses now, preventing rather than trying to be curative. So if we can have some foot balance x-rays, all you really need, if you could say if you've got long sprayed out feet, it usually tends to be front feet. It can be all four, but a lot of the time it tends to be front feet. So if we can get some shots of the side of the foot and the front of the foot using radiographs, then the farrier will then know exactly where they're going. We can check the alignment of the bones inside. And it may just require something like a frog support pad to help align everything as well. And we keep the horses going a little bit longer.
Perfect, brilliant, thank you. And one that we've not talked about tonight, but it's one that I've wondered as well. Studs are a topic of much debate. What advice can you give in terms of the number of holes just outside the shoe or in pairs?
Oh, this is a very controversial one. This is because you'll never please anybody with the answer with this one. For me personally, I think if you've got a young horse that's not used to wearing studs and they're still establishing the gait, I'd just go for one stud in the outside heel, because they're going to be working on grass, not a firm surface, and the consequence of them standing themselves with a stud on the inside is obviously quite significant, particularly if they go close behind. But if you've got an established competition horse, twin studs is the way to go. You've got the best purchase going and the best grip. So without, again, depending on how clumsy your horse is as well, it depends. And really, for me, I've ever used one stud, and I've never had any problems with any horses I've competed or any of the horses I've shod. But then I've also had clients have two in, and they've been fine as well. So really, for me, it depends on the individual, which is a very sit on the fence answer. But it's what, again, it comes back to watching a horse move, watching a horse in work, and knowing what the safest option is going to be for the horse and the rider. Yeah.
So more about their movement, and it's not going to be detrimental to their feet in any way. Just look at their movement and what level they're at. Yeah.
And then make the plan from there.
Perfect. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Mark. That's been so informative. Really, really thoroughly. Oh, hold on. One more question. Bear with me. Right. When should I consider a remedial specialist? What sort of situations?
Remedial specialists, that's a tricky one really, again, because it depends whether you want to. A lot of the time remedial ones, effectively it's a remedy for a problem that already exists. It depends really if you've got a problem with your horse's feet, and it's advisable to get them sorted before there's a problem, which is probably, in an ideal world, that's how we do these things. But I certainly think we're going down a route of then having to nerve block feet and radiograph feet. We need to be looking at corrective shoeing options. And then that's when you perhaps need to speak to somebody who is interested in corrective shoeing. We are all trained in corrective shoeing. Some of us tend to do more than others, and some of us do slightly different things. But I think the best outcome for all horses, for me personally, is a vet, a farrier, a physio, the owner, all working together for the betterment of the horse. The trouble comes is when barriers get put up. When barriers get put up between professionals, it gets frustrating for the owner, and the horse starts to lose as a consequence. So my approach is, when you get to these issues, is to formally contact whoever's going to be involved, send them images of what you're doing, keeping everybody informed, and it hasn't really not failed to work, to be honest, by doing it that way. And I think every farrier should be capable of that, and we should be encouraging that.
Brilliant, thank you. I think I say this every time, the more we learn, the more we realise how everything is just knitted together. And I suppose traditionally we've managed our horses like businesses have, in silos, one thing, everything separately, but actually there's such strong links, and the more we understand, the more we can create those links and, like you say, make it better for the horse. So that's amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll jump in here. I was really smiling at your last answer, because it's something that we've become really passionate about as we've increased our knowledge, is that connecting all of the different experts, which is effectively what we're trying to do in bringing people like you to the horse drive to share your knowledge so that they can connect the dots and build a great team around them. So yeah, we really enjoyed tonight. I've absolutely learnt boatloads again. I'm scribbling down top tips that I'm going to share. So thanks so much, Mark. We really, really appreciate it.
It's an absolute pleasure. No problem at all. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. And so talking of multiple experts, so we shift to the next slide. We've got 2 further experts joining us coming soon. So Susie D'Ambrosio, who is a natural horsewoman, absolutely incredible person who just seems to really understand not only horses but people. So she'll be talking in particular about loading problems. That is something that I'm sure every single one of us has experienced at some point. I know certainly I've been left crying on the back of my trailer, all dressed up and ready to go to a competition, and my horse is just like, I just don't fancy it today, Mum. So that's going to be really, really interesting. And then on the 5th of August, I was speaking to Dee Soyello. 2 really brilliant names for this one. So speaking to Dee today, she's really excited about this webinar. She's really focusing and thinking about some of the basics, some simple but really useful tips for all of us to think about how that we can warm up better, be more body aware, think about our posture and think about our fitness and how it will not only help us, but really help our horses, which I'm sure we all want. So do sign up for those. Keep an eye out. There's loads more that we're booking in for the autumn and winter series as well. So we've got an exciting lineup coming up. So without further ado, thanks once again to Mark. You've answered loads of questions, which when people watch back, I think they'll be scribbling notes as well. So thank you. And I know it's really hot for you at the moment working. So thanks for spending the evening with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I look forward to seeing everybody at Horsefest next year, and hope you've all got your tickets for July next year, and we'll have plenty to talk about and plenty to describe and help you all with your own horses.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Mark.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.